A mother-in-law's hatred is a venom that works slowly, but Constance's betrayal struck like a sudden execution. She dragged her own son's wife to the flesh peddlers in the dead of winter, trading a woman she labelled sterile and broken for 30 pieces of silver and a clearer path to a newer, fertile bloodline for her pack. Tossed into a rusted iron cage to be sold as a common servant, Adelaide awaited a life of brutal, freezing misery. But fate and the moon goddess possess a wicked sense of irony, because the man who shattered the auction block wasn't a slaver. He was the Alpha King. The stone walls of Winterfell Keep offered no warmth, only a damp, biting chill that seeped into the very marrow of those who walked its halls. For Adelaide, the cold was more than just the harsh medieval winter of the Northern Territories. It was the temperature of her marriage. 3 years had passed since she had been mated to Rowan, the future alpha of the Silver Moon Pack. At 18, she had been a vibrant, hopeful girl, deeply connected to her wolf, Phelan. Now at 21, she was a ghost haunting her own life. Her crime, her womb remained empty. In a medieval werewolf society, where a Luna's only true currency was her ability to provide strong heirs, Adelaide was completely bankrupt. "Drink it." Constance's voice was like grinding stones. Adelaide stared at the dark, sludgy liquid smoking in the wooden goblet. Constance, Rowan's mother, and the reigning Luna stood over her. She was a woman carved from ice and spite, her silver-streaked hair pulled back so tightly it pulled at the corners of her calculating eyes. "I said, drink it, Adelaide. It is a fertility draught, brewed by the witches of the Black Bog. If you are not entirely dried up, this will coax life into your barren soil." Adelaide's hands trembled as she lifted the goblet. The smell was atrocious, bitter ash, rotting leaves, and a faint, acrid scent that made Phelan, her inner wolf, whimper and recede into the deepest, darkest corner of her mind. Ever since Constance had started treating her a year ago, Adelaide's connection to her wolf had grown terrifyingly weak. She couldn't shift. She could barely feel her own strength. She forced the liquid down, gagging as it burned her throat. "Good," Constance sneered, snatching the goblet away, "though I suspect it is a waste of good coin. You are broken goods, Adelaide. My son is a fool for keeping you this long." The pack whispers. They say the moon goddess cursed you because your blood is weak. "I am trying, Constance," Adelaide whispered, her voice raspy. "Rowan and I—" "Do not speak his name as if you are equals." Constance slammed the goblet onto the heavy oak table. "Rowan requires an heir. Lady Genevieve of the River Pack has come of age. She is strong, she is fertile, and she possesses a dowry of 50 war horses. And you? You brought us nothing but a pretty face that is quickly fading from the stress of your own inadequacy." Adelaide swallowed the lump in her throat. She looked past Constance, hoping to see Rowan enter the great hall, hoping her mate would stand up for her just once. But Rowan was a weak man hiding behind a broad chest. He avoided her gaze lately, spending more time in the training yards and in the company of the visiting Lady Genevieve than in their shared chambers. That evening, the humiliation reached its peak. During the grand feast to celebrate the winter solstice, the great hall was packed with hundreds of wolves, all tearing into roasted meats and drinking heavy ale. Adelaide sat silently beside Rowan. Constance stood at the head of the table, tapping her silver goblet. The hall quieted. "My wolves," Constance announced, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "We celebrate the return of the sun, but we must also look to the future of our pack. A pack without an heir is a pack destined to fall to the rogues." She turned her sharp gaze directly to Adelaide. The silence in the room became suffocating. "It brings me great sorrow to acknowledge that our current union is unfruitful. The moon goddess demands strength, not sterility." Gasps rippled through the hall. Publicly addressing a mate's fertility was the ultimate taboo, a degradation usually reserved for banished Omegas. Adelaide looked at Rowan, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Defend me," she pleaded through their fractured mind link. "Please, Rowan." Rowan stared at his plate, his jaw tight. He didn't say a word. He didn't even reach out to hold her hand. In that devastating moment of silence, Adelaide realized her marriage wasn't just cold. It was already dead. A wolf without a pack is a tragedy. A wolf abandoned by her mate while still sitting beside him is a living death. Adelaide excused herself, fleeing the hall amidst the mocking whispers of the pack. She packed a small satchel in her chambers, tears hot and angry on her cheeks. She didn't know where she would go, but she could no longer endure this. But Constance was already 10 steps ahead of her. The next morning, before the sun had even crested the snow-capped peaks, Adelaide was shaken awake by 2 burly guards. "Dress warmly, my lady," one of them grunted. "The lunar dowager demands your presence. You are taking a journey." Confused and disoriented, Adelaide donned her thickest wool dress and a heavy, fur-lined cloak. When she stepped out into the freezing courtyard, Constance was waiting by a large, unmarked, iron-wrought carriage. "Where is Rowan?" Adelaide asked, her breath misting in the frigid air. "My son is hunting," Constance lied smoothly. "You and I are travelling to the edge of the territory. There is an elder healer there, a final attempt to fix whatever is rotting inside you." Adelaide's instincts screamed at her. Phelan, buried deep beneath the haze of the herbal teas, let out a weak, desperate scratch at the walls of her mind. Danger. But what choice did she have? To refuse a direct order from the reigning Luna was treason. She climbed into the carriage. Constance followed, her expression unreadable. For 4 hours they rode in oppressive silence as the carriage bumped and swayed over frozen, rutted roads, moving further and further away from the safety of Silvermoon territory and into the lawless no-man's land known as the Grey Wastes. Finally, the carriage ground to a halt. Adelaide looked out the small, barred window. They were in a dense, dead forest. Waiting in a clearing was a large caravan of enclosed wagons, surrounded by rough-looking men and wolves, covered in scars. They carried the stench of old blood, unwashed bodies, and despair. At the head of the caravan stood Lord Morvan. He was a notorious flesh peddler, a rogue wolf who made his fortune capturing and selling exiled wolves, humans, and Omegas to the highest bidders in the underground markets. "What is this?" Adelaide panicked, turning to Constance. "Why are we stopping here?" Constance didn't look at her. She simply pushed the carriage door open and stepped out into the snow. "Bring her out!" Constance ordered the guards. Rough hands grabbed Adelaide's arms, hauling her out of the carriage. She fought, kicking and thrashing, but she was weak, her wolf suppressed. They dragged her to the center of the clearing, throwing her to her knees in the snow before Morvan. "Ah," Morvan smiled, revealing rotting teeth. "The Silvermoon princess. You said she was pretty, Constance, but you didn't say she was beautiful." "Her beauty is useless," Constance spat, pulling a heavy leather pouch from her cloak. "She is barren. 3 years and not a single swelling of the belly. She is a drain on our resources and an insult to my son. I want her gone, taken far from the north." Adelaide's blood ran cold. The reality of the situation crashed over her like an avalanche. "No," she gasped, looking up at Constance. "You can't do this. I am your son's mate. Rowan will kill you for this." Constance let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Rowan, who do you think signed the decree of annulment last night while you were weeping in your chambers?" She pulled a rolled piece of parchment from her sleeve, displaying the royal seal of Silvermoon and Rowan's unmistakable signature. He knew. Rowan had traded her away to make room for Genevieve. The betrayal was a physical blow, sharper than any blade. It shattered her chest, and in the ruins of her broken heart, The mate bond snapped. Adelaide screamed, a raw, agonizing sound of a soul being ripped in two. Morven tossed a smaller pouch of silver coins to Constance. 30 pieces of silver, as agreed for a sterile female. She'll fetch a decent price as a scullery maid or a bed warmer for some lesser rogue, but nothing more. Just ensure she never returns, Constance said coldly, turning her back on Adelaide and climbing back into her carriage. "Constance, please!" Adelaide sobbed, struggling against the guards, but the carriage rolled away, leaving her in the snow. Morven grabbed her roughly by the jaw, inspecting her face. "Put the iron on her. Throw her in the holding cage with the other strays." Heavy, freezing iron cuffs were slapped onto Adelaide's wrists. The metal was infused with wolfsbane, burning her skin upon contact and completely severing her remaining connection to Phelan. She was dragged to the back of a large wooden wagon and thrown inside a rusted iron cage. For a week, they travelled. The conditions were horrific. Adelaide was given barely enough water to survive and scraps of stale bread. The bitter cold bit into her flesh, and the wolfsbane cuffs left angry, festering burns on her wrists. The other captives in the cage, a mix of human peasants and rogue omegas, huddled together for warmth, their eyes hollow with defeat. Adelaide didn't speak. She didn't cry after the second day. A terrifying, hollow numbness had taken over. She had been a noble woman, a Luna in training, and a devoted mate. Now, she was property. She was meat, sold for being broken by the very people who had broken her. On the 7th day, the air shifted. The scent of wood smoke, roasting meats, and thousands of packed bodies filtered into the cage. The caravan stopped. "On your feet, filth!" Morvan roared, hitting the bars of the cage with a heavy iron rod. "We've arrived at Frostgate. Look lively, or I'll flay the skin from your backs." Frostgate, the black market of the medieval werewolf world. Adelaide closed her eyes, preparing herself for the final descent into hell. Frostgate was a chaotic sprawl of tents, wooden stages, and muddy thoroughfares, built inside the ruins of an ancient fallen castle. It was a place where morality went to die. Mercenaries, rogue alphas, disgraced lords, and wealthy merchants roamed the stalls, trading in stolen weapons, illicit potions, and slaves. Adelaide was dragged from the cage, her legs barely able to support her. She was filthy, her beautiful blonde hair matted, her dress torn, and her spirit utterly crushed. Morvan's men chained her in a line with a dozen other women, marching them toward the grand auction block at the center of the ruins. As they walked, the crowd jeered and whistled. Adelaide kept her eyes on the mud beneath her feet. Suddenly, a profound shift occurred in the atmosphere. The rowdy, drunken shouts of the market began to die down. The air grew thick, heavy, with an oppressive, suffocating aura of pure dominance. The hair on Adelaide's arms stood up. Even through the agonizing haze of the wolfsbane cuffs, her dormant wolf, Phelan, stirred. A single, frantic thought pushed through the fog. Alpha. Not just an alpha king. Adelaide forced her heavy head up. Parting the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea was a contingent of massive, heavily armed warriors. They wore armor of dark, forged steel and thick dire wolf pelts draped over their shoulders. At their center rode a man on a war horse, as black as midnight. King Gideon of the Ironblood Pack. He was a legend whispered about to frighten disobedient pups. He had conquered the Eastern Territories before his 25th winter. He was ruthless, brilliant, and possessed a savagery in battle that bordered on the demonic. Yet, as he dismounted, the physical reality of him stole the breath from the crowd. Gideon was terrifyingly handsome. He stood well over 6 feet, his shoulders broad and powerful under his dark leathers. His hair was a deep, raven black, and his eyes, a startling, piercing shade of molten gold, swept over the market with casual disdain. A jagged, faded scar ran over the bridge of his nose, the only imperfection on an otherwise statuesque face. "What is the Iron-Blood King doing at Frostgate?" whispered a terrified Omega beside Adelaide. "They say he's looking for a Luna," another murmured. "His council demands it, but he rejects every noblewoman sent to him. He came to see if the market held any hidden warriors." Gideon and his beta, Silas, took a position near the front of the auction block, their presence forcing the lesser lords to step back in deference. The auction began. Morven stood on the wooden stage, practically vibrating with greed at the sight of the king in his audience. Women and men were paraded up, their strengths and assets shouted to the crowd. Bids were called out in silver and gold. "And now," Morvan shouted, signalling his guards, "a special piece, a former high-born of the north." The guards grabbed Adelaide's chains, jerking her forward. She stumbled up the wooden steps, falling to her knees on the rough planks. The crowd murmured, taking in her bruised face and aristocratic, though ruined, features. "She has beauty, yes," Morvan continued, projecting his voice. "But I will not deceive my honest buyers. She is sold as cheap labor. Her womb is barren. 3 years mated, and she yielded no fruit. She is sterile, broken, and unranked. Bidding starts at a mere 10 copper pieces." The humiliation was absolute. Laughter erupted from a group of merchants in the front. To be announced as barren in front of hundreds of wolves was a degradation worse than death. Adelaide squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the wooden boards would open up and swallow her. 15 copper, a toothless innkeeper yelled. "She can scrub my floors." 20, a greasy-looking rogue shouted. "She's pretty enough for my bed, barren or not." Suddenly, a scent hit Adelaide. It was overpowering, intoxicating, a blend of pine needles, sharp winter air, and the metallic tang of blood. It shocked her system, cutting straight through the wolfsbane, poisoning her veins. Inside her mind, Phelan threw her head back and let out a deafening howl. "Mate!" Adelaide gasped, her eyes snapping open. At the exact same moment, King Gideon froze. He had been turning away, completely uninterested in the auction, when he suddenly stopped. His massive frame tensed. His golden eyes snapped toward the stage, locking directly onto Adelaide. The air in the courtyard cracked with sudden, explosive tension. Gideon's golden eyes flared, the pupils dilating until they were almost entirely black. The sheer force of his aura slammed into the crowd, dropping weaker wolves to their knees in submission. 50 copper, a merchant called out, oblivious to the changing tide. Gideon moved. He didn't walk. He stalked toward the stage, a predator locking onto its prey. Silas, his beta, looked alarmed. "My king?" Gideon ignored him. He reached the edge of the stage, towering over Morven. The flesh peddler visibly shook, sweating profusely under the Alpha King's lethal gaze. My king," Morvan stammered. "Do you wish to place a bid on this barren creature?" Gideon didn't look at Morven. His eyes were entirely consumed by Adelaide. He saw past the dirt, past the bruises, past the rusted iron chains. He saw the way she was shivering, and a low, terrifying growl began to rumble in his chest, a sound that vibrated the very wood of the stage. "She is not barren." Gideon's voice was dark, a dangerous purr that carried across the dead, silent courtyard. "She is poisoned. Her wolf is suffocating beneath the iron you placed on her." Morvan stepped back, raising his hands. I only sell what I am given, Your Grace. She is just a useless—" Before Morvan could finish the sentence, Gideon vaulted onto the stage with impossible speed. He bypassed the slaver entirely and knelt before Adelaide. The crowd held its collective breath. The most feared man in the realm was kneeling in the mud and filth for a disgraced, cast-off wife. Gideon reached out, his massive, calloused hands gently taking hold of the heavy iron cuffs on her wrists. He didn't bother looking for the key. With a sudden, savage flex of his arms, the metal groaned, shrieked, and snapped in two. Adelaide gasped as the wolfsbane stopped burning her flesh. She looked up, her tear-filled blue eyes meeting his molten gold. Gideon reached up, slowly undoing the clasp of his heavy, black, dire wolf fur cloak. He wrapped it securely around Adelaide's trembling shoulders, pulling her against the warmth of his chest. He stood up, effortlessly lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He turned to face the stunned crowd, his fangs descending, his eyes glowing with unrestrained, possessive fury. "She is not for sale," the Alpha King roared, his voice echoing off the ruins of Frostgate. "She is my mate, and she is your queen." The journey from Frostgate to the Ironblood territories was a blur of speed, violence, and overwhelming sensation for Adelaide. Immediately after Gideon's declaration, the market had erupted into chaos. Lord Morven, realizing he had enslaved the fated mate of the Alpha King, had attempted to flee. He didn't make it to the edge of the ruins. At a silent nod from Gideon, Silas and two other Ironblood warriors intercepted him. The sounds of Morven's demise, short, brutal, and final, echoed behind them as Gideon carried Adelaide to his great war-horse. For 3 days they rode hard toward the east. Adelaide spent most of the journey wrapped in Gideon's massive dire wolf fur cloak, secured against his chest. The warmth radiating from him was a drug to her frozen, battered body. The potent scent of him, that intoxicating mix of pine, winter air, and the underlying metallic tang of dominance, worked to soothe the ragged edges of her soul, even as her logical mind screamed in terror of who held her. Gideon spoke little during the ride, issuing commands to his men with curt gestures or low growls. But to Adelaide, he was surprisingly gentle. When they stopped to rest, he personally fed her broth and watered down wine, his massive, scarred hands moving with meticulous care so as not to bruise her further. He never asked for permission, nor did he offer explanations. He simply took charge of her survival. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the jagged peaks of the Iron Mountains loomed ahead. Nestled high within a sheer rock face was the Ironblood stronghold, the Iron Citadel. It was a formidable fortress of black volcanic stone and reinforced iron, designed not for beauty, but for war. It looked cold, unyielding, and terrifying, much like its king. As they passed through the massive iron gates, thousands of wolves gathered to watch their king return with a woman in his arms. The mind-link chatter was deafening, a storm of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. Gideon didn't take her to the Great Hall to be gawked at. He carried her directly to the royal quarters in the highest tower, dismissing all servants, save for one elderly woman named Martha. "Bathe her," Gideon commanded Martha, placing Adelaide gently on a massive bed covered in furs. "Burn the rags she wears. Treat the burns on her wrists with the highest-grade silver salve, and call for Mother Beatrice, immediately." He turned to leave, but Adelaide, fueled by a sudden spike of panic at being left alone in this strange, formidable place, clutched at his sleeve. Her fingers were weak, her nails ragged. Gideon stopped, looking down at her hand on his dark leather arm, then up at her eyes. The molten gold of his gaze had cooled slightly, replaced by an unreadable intensity. "Where are you going?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "To convene the council," Gideon replied, his voice a low rumble. "They need to understand that the dynamic of this realm has shifted. Rest, Adelaide. You are safe here. No one will ever harm you again within these walls. Upon my life." His declaration was solemn, a vow made by a king to his mate. He gently disengaged her fingers and strode out of the room, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him. Martha, a bustling woman with kind eyes and a direct manner, wastes no time. She bathed Adelaide in hot water, scented with lavender and healing herbs, gently scrubbing away the filth of the road and the slave market. When Martha saw the deep, festering chemical burns on Adelaide's wrists from the wolfsbane cuffs, she let out a hiss of fury. "Animals," she muttered. To do this to a female, a fated mate no less. Lord Morven got off too easy. After the bath, Adelaide was dressed in a soft, thick tunic of green wool and laid back on the bed. Mother Beatrice arrived soon after. She was an ancient wolf, the pack's chief healer, her face a map of wrinkles, but her eyes sharp and clear. Beatrice examined the burns, applying a cooling, pungent salve. Then she placed her hands on Adelaide's abdomen, closing her eyes. She remained that way for a long time, her brow furrowed in concentration. Phelan, still weak but free of the iron, shifted uneasily in Adelaide's mind. "Tell me, child," Beatrice said eventually, opening her eyes. "What did they give you at Silvermoon? To fix you?" "My mother-in-law, Constance. She had me drink a fertility draught, brewed by black bog witches. Daily, for over a year." Beatrice's expression darkened. "A witch's brew. I thought I smelled the taint of it." "Child, that was no fertility draught. It was a potent suppression tincture, laced with trace amounts of moonshade. A poison that slowly severs the connection between a wolf and her human, mimicking the symptoms of true barrenness, and eventually leading to death." Adelaide felt the room spin. The horror of it was complete. Constance hadn't just hated her. She had been systematically murdering her, day by day, while painting her as the failure. "Then, I am not sterile?" Adelaide asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Beatrice took both of Adelaide's hands in hers. "No, you are not. In fact, if your wolf fully recovers, you might have the opposite problem. The moon goddess rarely blesses an alpha king with a broken mate. The bond Gideon feels is real, and the potential for life within you is vast. But we have a long road of healing ahead." Adelaide lay back on the pillows, tears leaking from her eyes. It was too much to process. The betrayal of her past, the terrifying responsibility of her future. She was the mate of the Ironblood King, and she was not broken. She was just deeply, cruelly betrayed. The Council of the Ironblood Pack was not pleased. Gideon sat at the head of the long obsidian table, listening to his elders and ranking warriors voice their objections. The atmosphere was taut with suppressed aggression. "A northern female, Your Grace," roared Commander Kalen, a scarred warrior who valued strength above all else. "From Silvermoon. They are weak, soft wolves. They trade and negotiate when they should fight. And to make her Luna? To make her our queen? She was sold at a slave auction, Kalen." Silas, the beta, interjected calmly. "She was at rock bottom. She knows adversity." "She was sold because she is barren," Kalen retorted, slamming his fist on the table. "A Luna's first duty is to provide heirs. An alpha king needs strong sons to secure the lineage. You have claimed a broken vessel, my king." Gideon let the noise wash over him. His aura remained suppressed, but a dark promise lurked in his eyes. He let them speak, let them vent their traditionalist anxieties. "Are you finished?" Gideon asked quietly. The room went dead silent. The contrast between his low volume and the explosive power behind it was more terrifying than any shout. He stood up, towering over them. "You question my judgment. You question the moon goddess herself, who wove the thread of her fate into mine. Adelaide is my mate. By law, by blood, and by fated bond. She is your Luna. Any insult directed at her is an insult directly to me, punishable by death. Does anyone else wish to debate her worthiness?" No one moved. Even Kalen lowered his gaze, swallowing his pride. The reality of Gideon's wrath was not something one tempted lightly. "The coronation and mating ceremony will take place during the next full moon," Gideon announced. "Prepare the citadel. We will invite the neighboring packs to witness the union." "My king," Kalen risked, looking up. "The Silvermoon pack. They must be informed that their rejected daughter is now the queen of the Ironblood." A vicious, small smile played on Gideon's lips. "Oh, they will be informed. Silas, send a courier to Silvermoon. Inform Alpha Rowan and Lunar Dowager Constance that King Gideon of the Ironblood commands their presence at the full moon mating ceremony. Tell them we wish to thank them personally for their gift." Silas bowed, a knowing glint in his eyes. "At once, my king." While the political storm brewed below, Adelaide spent the next week recovering under the strict care of Martha and Beatrice. The wolfsbane was purged from her system, and the burns on her wrists began to heal, leaving behind thin, silver scars. Slowly the connection to Phelan grew stronger. She could shift now, running through the enclosed royal gardens, feeling the wind in her fur for the first time in a year. But the mental scars remained deep. The memory of Rowan's silent betrayal and Constance's cold cruelty haunted her dreams. And then there was Gideon. He visited her every evening. He would sit in an armchair by the fire, reading dispatches or cleaning his weapons while she rested on the bed. He never forced conversation, nor did he attempt to claim the physical rights of the mate bond. Yet his presence was undeniable. It was a weight, a protection, and an invitation all at once. "You don't know me," Adelaide said one evening, watching the firelight play across the scars on his face. Gideon paused in sharpening his dagger. "I know your scent. I know the rhythm of your heart. I know the sound of your soul calling to mine. The rest is just details, Adelaide. Details we have a lifetime to learn." "They hate me here," she whispered. "Your people. They think I am weak. Barren." Gideon looked at her, his golden eyes burning with sudden heat. "Beatrice tells me otherwise. She tells me you were poisoned." Adelaide nodded silently. Gideon stood up and walked to the bed, kneeling beside it so they were eye to level. "Kaelin and the traditionalists value physical, martial strength. They believe a Luna must be a warrior capable of leading the vanguard. But real strength, Adelaide, is enduring what you have endured and still having eyes that hold kindness. Real strength is Phelan, fighting to survive the suppression." He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, waiting for permission. Gently, Adelaide slid her hand under his. The spark of the mate bond crackled between them, sending a rush of adrenaline and comfort through her veins. "Let them doubt," Gideon said softly. "The full moon approaches. You will have your opportunity to show them who you are." The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days before the full moon, Gideon held a formal court in the Great Hall. The room was packed with hundreds of members of the Ironblood Pack, warriors, elders, nobility, and artisans. Adelaide was required to attend, sitting on a smaller throne beside Gideon's large obsidian seat. She wore a gown of heavy, dark blue velvet, high-necked to hide any remaining bruises. Her hair was braided intricately, and she wore minimal jewelry. Despite her internal trembling, she held her head high, channeling the lunar training she had received years ago. The court proceeded with reports on trade, border skirmishes, and winter stores. Adelaide sat silently, observing the rigid hierarchy and the veiled hostility directed at her from the noblewomen who had hoped to capture Gideon's heart. Toward the end of the session, Lady Bryony, Kaelin's sister, and a formidable warrior in her own right, stepped forward. She was beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way, and she eyed Adelaide with clear disdain. "Your Grace," Bryony addressed Gideon, though her eyes were fixed on Adelaide. "The women of the Ironblood are renowned for their strength. We breed alphas. We hunt with our packs. Our previous Luna, your mother, could best 3 alphas in combat simultaneously. We worry, my king, that the pack dynamic will soften under a less capable Luna." A murmur of agreement went through the hall. Bryony was touching upon the raw nerve of the pack's anxieties. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Adelaide is my mate, Bryony. Her capability is not for you to question." "Of course, Your Grace," Bryony said, her tone smooth venom. "But perhaps, to settle the pack's nerves, our new Luna would be willing to participate in a traditional Ironblood demonstration. Not a duel, naturally, she smiled fakely, but a display of connection, a simple call to the wild, to show us that her wolf is healthy. The challenge was brilliant. It was passive-aggressive, playing on the rumor of Adelaide's weak connection to her wolf. If she refused, she confirmed their fears. If she tried and failed to summon a strong call, she would be humiliated. Gideon was about to roar his dismissal when Adelaide stood up. The movement was unexpected. The great hall went silent. Adelaide stepped down from the dais, walking past Bryony, until she stood in the center of the room. She felt the heavy weight of their judgment, the echo of Constance's voice calling her sterile, the image of Rowan staring at his plate, the anger, the grief, and the need for justice that had been simmering within her finally boiled over. "Phelan," Adelaide called internally. "They doubt us. Let them hear us." "I am here," Phelan answered, her voice stronger than ever before, vibrating with possessive fury. Adelaide closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, drawing from the primal energy of the mate bond, the warmth of the iron citadel, and her own resilience. She opened her mouth, and from the depths of her soul, she unleashed a howl. It was not the high, weak sound of a northern wolf. It was a raw, primordial sound that ripped through the hall. It held the cracking tension of a winter storm, the agonizing grief of her betrayal, and the lethal, dominant power of a queen claiming her territory. It was a roar that vibrated the very stones of the fortress. The effect was instantaneous. Wolves throughout the hall gasped, staggering under the sheer force of her aura. Weaker wolves dropped to their knees, their inner wolves submissive to the dominant sound. Even Silas and Kaelin looked stunned, their eyes widening in shock. Adelaide ended the call, opening her eyes. The golden light of the mate bond receded from her blue eyes. She looked directly at Lady Bryony. "I may not have bred alphas yet, Lady Bryony." Adelaide's voice was clear, carrying across the silent hall. "But my wolf is far from broken. I am the fated mate of the Ironblood King. I will not be tested by his subjects." She turned and walked back up to the dais, reclaiming her seat beside Gideon. A moment of stunned silence followed, and then a roar of approval erupted from the warriors in the hall. They were a pack that respected raw power, and they had just witnessed it. Gideon sat back in his throne, his golden eyes shining with unrestrained pride and possessiveness. He didn't say a word, but he reached out and took Adelaide's hand, lacing his fingers through hers, publicly acknowledging her first victory. The broken northern bride was gone. The Queen of the Ironblood had finally arrived. The journey to the Ironblood Keep was grueling, but for Constance, the Dowager Luna of Silver Moon, it was a necessary triumph. Seated inside her velvet-lined carriage beside her son, Rowan, and his new, heavily pregnant mate, Genevieve of House Sterling, Constance felt the smug satisfaction of a woman who had perfectly orchestrated her family's destiny. "Straighten your posture, Rowan," Constance chided, wrapping her ermine cloak tighter against the biting chill of the Iron Mountains. "King Gideon is not a man who respects slouching. He is a conqueror. We are here to pledge our fealty, present Genevieve's dowry gifts, and secure a trade alliance. Do not look like a frightened pup." Rowan shifted uncomfortably, his handsome but weak face pale. "They say he has an army of 10,000 pure-blooded warriors, Mother, and that he drinks the blood of rogue alphas. It is unnerving." "Gossip for peasants," Constance scoffed, though she too felt the oppressive, ancient magic of the Iron Mountains pressing down on her chest. "He has summoned us personally for his mating ceremony. This is an honor. He has finally chosen a queen, likely some hulking warrior woman from the eastern steppes. We will smile, we will flatter her, and we will secure our borders." Genevieve, a pretty but arrogant girl with a swelling belly, stroked her stomach proudly. Perhaps the new queen will need advice on bearing heirs. I hear the Ironblood women are so busy fighting they forget how to breed. Constance smirked. Indeed, my dear, you are the perfect example of what a Luna should be. Fruitful and obedient, unlike the useless trash we've finally disposed of. Rowan looked away, staring out the frosty window. A brief flash of guilt crossed his features at the mention of Adelaide, but he quickly buried it. He had a strong mate now, and a pup on the way. His conscience was clear enough. When the carriage passed through the massive, spiked iron gates of the citadel, the sheer scale of the Ironblood stronghold silenced them all. Thousands of elite guards lined the battlements. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, expensive spices, and the intoxicating, dangerous musk of an apex predator pack preparing for a festival. Beta Silas, draped in dark leathers and a heavy wolf pelt, awaited them in the courtyard. His expression was carved from stone. Alpha Rowan, Dowager Constance, Lady Genevieve, Silas greeted, his voice lacking any warmth. You are expected in the great hall. The king holds court before the moon rises. Constance stepped out, holding her chin high. Thank you, Beta Silas. We bring magnificent gifts from the Silver Moon territory to honor your new queen. I am sure the queen will find your presence unforgettable, Silas replied smoothly, a dangerous glint in his eye that Constance was too self-absorbed to catch. They were escorted through the labyrinthine stone corridors, the heavy oak doors of the great hall finally swinging open to reveal a sight that stole the breath from their lungs. The hall was a cavern of wealth and military might. Tapestries of crushed velvet and woven gold hung from the walls. Hundreds of alpha-ranked warriors, lords and ladies of the Ironblood and their vassal states stood in perfect, disciplined rows. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a massive throne forged from obsidian and iron, was King Gideon. He was a terrifying vision of absolute power. He wore a tunic of midnight blue silk, threaded with silver, a heavy crown of jagged iron resting on his raven-black hair. His golden eyes, luminous and predatory, tracked their approach. Constance, Rowan, and Genevieve walked the long aisle, the silence of the hall pressing in on them like physical weights. They reached the base of the dais and bowed low. Rise, Gideon's voice rumbled, echoing like thunder in the cavernous room. Constance stood, putting on her most charming, practiced smile. King Gideon, the Silver Moon Pack extends its deepest congratulations on your fated mating. We bring 20 chests of northern silk, 10 barrels of our finest mead, and the warm wishes of our growing family. She gestured to Genevieve's belly. May your union be as fruitful as my son's. Gideon did not smile. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his scarred hand. You speak of fruitfulness, Constance. A bold topic for a woman whose hands are steeped in poison. Constance's smile faltered. I do not understand, Your Grace. We called you here today, Gideon continued, his voice lethally calm, because my queen specifically requested your presence. She wished to return a favor. Rowan frowned, stepping forward defensively. Your Grace, we only wish to honor your queen. If we have offended, you will meet her now, Gideon interrupted, standing up. The sheer force of his alpha aura flooded the room, forcing Rowan to his knees instantly. Genevieve gasped, clutching her stomach, while Constance trembled, her knees knocking together. Gideon extended his hand toward the heavy velvet curtains behind the thrones, presenting the Luna of the Ironblood Pack, the true queen of the East. The curtains parted. The woman who stepped forward was a vision of ethereal, devastating beauty. She wore a gown of pure, spun silver that flowed around her like liquid moonlight. A delicate crown of woven winter roses and iron sat upon her golden hair. Her posture was flawlessly regal, her shoulders thrown back, her aura radiating a pure, blinding lunar power that rivaled the king's own dominance. It was Adelaide. The great hall remained dead silent as Adelaide descended the 3 small steps to stand beside Gideon. He took her hand, lifting it to his lips, his golden eyes never leaving her face. Rowan's jaw fell open. The blood drained from his face entirely, leaving him a ghastly, sickly white. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic, choking sound escaped his throat. Constance stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest as if she had been shot. "No," she whispered, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it bordered on madness. "No, that is impossible. It is a trick, a glamour." "Hello, Constance," Adelaide said. Her voice was no longer the soft, timid whisper of the broken girl from Winterfell Keep. It was the resonant, commanding tone of a queen. "Rowan. It has been a long winter, has it not?" Genevieve, oblivious to the history, looked confused. "Rowan, who is this woman? Why is she looking at you like that?" Rowan couldn't answer. He was staring at Adelaide's neck, looking for the mating mark he had rejected, but finding only flawless skin, soon to be claimed by the most powerful alpha in the world. "Adelaide," Constance stammered, frantically trying to salvage the situation. She forced a hysterical laugh. My dear daughter-in-law. Oh, praise the moon, goddess. King Gideon, you must understand, she was kidnapped, taken from our carriage by rogue slavers. We searched for months." Gideon let out a low, terrifying growl. He snapped his fingers. Beta Silas stepped forward, unrolling a piece of parchment. "The confession and ledger of the flesh peddler Morvan, extracted before his execution," Silas read aloud to the silent hall. Quote, 30 pieces of silver paid to Dowager Constance of Silvermoon for the barren female, Adelaide, instructed to take her to the Grey Wastes or the Frostgate slave markets, kept in wolfsbane iron upon Constance's strict orders. Gasps erupted from the visiting dignitaries. To sell a pack member was a crime. To sell a mated daughter to the flesh peddlers was an abomination. Silas unrolled a second parchment. The decree of annulment, signed by Alpha Rowan of Silvermoon, dated the night before the transaction. I didn't know about the slavers," Rowan cried out, his voice cracking with panic. He looked at Adelaide, his eyes begging. "Adelaide, please. I thought she was sending you to a cloister. I just wanted a pup. You were barren." "She was never barren, you snivelling coward," Gideon roared, his voice shaking the chandeliers. "She was poisoned." The silence that followed was suffocating. Gideon looked at Constance, his eyes practically glowing with lethal intent. Mother Beatrice, our chief healer, found the traces of moonshade in her blood. A slow-acting poison administered daily to suppress her wolf and mimic sterility. "A poison you brewed, Constance?" Genevieve shrieked, backing away from Constance and Rowan in horror. "You poisoned her! You sold your own family?" Constance realized she was cornered. The mask of the elegant dowager cracked, revealing the ugly, desperate hag beneath. She sneered at Adelaide. She was weak, a northern beggar with no dowry. She deserved nothing. I did what I had to do to protect the Silvermoon bloodline. And in doing so, Adelaide said calmly, stepping forward, "You destroyed it." Adelaide looked down at Rowan, who was still kneeling on the marble floor. "I loved you, Rowan. I endured the whispers, the coldness, the bitter tease, because I believed we were mates. But you stood by while your mother broke my soul, and you signed my life away for a dowry of war horses. You are no alpha. You are a shadow of a man." She turned to Gideon. "My king, they are in your domain. I leave their judgment to you." Gideon stepped down from the dais, his heavy boots echoing off the marble. He stopped in front of Constance. The dowager shrank back, trembling violently under the sheer, suffocating weight of his killing intent. "In the old days," Gideon said softly, "I would have ripped your throat out and mounted your head on the gates of this citadel as a warning." Constance whimpered, tears of genuine terror streaming down her wrinkled face. "But my queen has a more poetic sense of justice," Gideon continued. "Death is too quick for a woman who values status and comfort above all else." Gideon turned to address the hall. "Hear the judgment of the Ironblood. Rowan of Silvermoon, you are stripped of your alpha title. You are weak, treacherous, and unfit to lead. Your territory is hereby annexed as a vassal state of the Ironblood Kingdom. Your warriors will be absorbed into our ranks, and your lands will be overseen by Beta Silas." Rowan wept openly, his face buried in his hands. Everything he had betrayed Adelaide to secure, his title, his pride, his pack, was gone in a single breath. "As for you, Constance," Gideon's voice dropped to a sinister whisper, "you sold my mate for 30 pieces of silver to the Frostgate slave markets. Therefore, it is only fitting you experience the life you deemed her worthy of." Constance's eyes widened in sheer panic. "No, no, please! I am high-born. I am a dowager Luna." "You are nothing," Gideon corrected. "Guards, strip her of her silks. Bind her wrists in iron, without the wolf's bane, for she has no wolf worth suppressing. She is banished to the rock quarries of the grey wastes. She will break stones in the freezing cold until the end of her miserable days. If she stops working, she does not eat." "No!" Constance screamed as 2 massive Ironblood warriors seized her arms. "Rowan, help me! Genevieve!" But Rowan didn't look up, and Genevieve turned her face away in disgust. Constance was dragged kicking and screaming from the great hall, her frantic cries fading down the long stone corridors until there was only silence. Gideon looked at Genevieve, who was shaking violently, clutching her pregnant belly. "Lady Genevieve of House Sterile, you were a pawn in Constance's game. You bear a pup, and the Ironblood do not punish the innocent. You may return to the river pack with your dowry intact. Or you may stay with this Omega," he gestured to Rowan in disgust, "and live as a commoner in my lands. The choice is yours." Genevieve looked at Rowan, a man stripped of his title, his wealth, and his dignity. She spat on the floor next to him. "I'm a daughter of House Sterile. I will not raise my child with a coward." She bowed clumsily to Adelaide and Gideon. "Thank you, Your Grace. I will return to my father." Rowan was left alone on the floor, a broken, pathetic figure. At a nod from Silas, guards hauled him to his feet and dragged him away to the servants' quarters, where he would spend the rest of his life mucking out the stables of the wolves he once thought himself superior to. The heavy doors of the great hall closed. The stench of betrayal was gone, replaced once more by the scent of pine, winter air, and the electric hum of the impending ceremony. Gideon turned back to Adelaide. The cold, ruthless king melted away, leaving only the fiercely devoted mate. He reached out, gently tracing the line of her jaw. "Is your heart at peace, my queen?" he asked quietly. Adelaide took a deep breath. The heavy, dark weight that had lived in her chest for 3 years was gone. The ghosts of Winterfell Keep had been exorcised. She looked into Gideon's golden eyes, seeing the absolute adoration and protection burning within them. "It is." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made Phelan purr with contentment. "But I believe we have a ceremony to finish." Gideon's eyes darkened with passion. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her back up the steps to the center of the dais, as the silver light of the full moon pierced through the high stained glass windows, bathing them in ethereal light. Before the assembled might of the Ironblood Kingdom, Gideon bared his neck to her. Adelaide leaned in, her fangs descending, and claimed her king, biting deeply into the juncture of his shoulder. Gideon let out a guttural roar of pure triumph, claiming her in return. The bond snapped perfectly into place, a rush of golden, intoxicating magic that intertwined their souls for eternity. The great hall erupted into deafening howls, a chorus of thousands of wolves welcoming their new Luna. their powerful queen who had walked through the fires of hell and emerged forged in iron. 4 months later, the Iron Citadel was vibrant with life. Spring had finally broken through the frost, and the royal gardens were blooming with wildflowers. Adelaide sat in a sunlit courtyard, Gideon's massive head resting in her lap as he dozed peacefully after a morning of training his generals. Adelaide smiled, running her fingers through his raven hair. She placed her other hand over her gently swelling stomach. The barren northern bride was carrying the heir to the Ironblood throne, and Mother Beatrice had happily confirmed it was 2 strong heartbeats, not just one. She had lost a false family, only to be given the greatest kingdom and the fiercest love the moon goddess could bestow. Adelaide's journey from a discarded, abused wife to the revered queen of the Ironblood kingdom is a testament to the enduring power of resilience and fated destiny. Stripped of her dignity and poisoned by those who should have protected her, she could have easily surrendered to the freezing misery of the slave cages. Yet the darkest betrayals often serve as the crucible in which true strength is forged. King Gideon, a man feared by all, looked past the rusted iron and the false labels to see the unbroken spirit of his equal. Constance and Rowan's deceit ultimately became the very instrument of their own destruction, proving that karma, guided by the moon goddess, is inescapable. In the end, Adelaide found not only justice and a kingdom, but a love that healed her deepest scars, proving that the most magnificent reigns begin where the deepest sorrows end.